Welcome on in, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. This is our St Kilda Saints 2024 review episode. We're going through all the teams as they get knocked out. With a review of their season, how they went, what went right, what went wrong, little review of the stats, a look at some of their best players, some reasons why maybe they were underperforming or overperforming. We'll have a look at all of that. Before we get into that, though, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, as always, and also the podcast. That's what I was looking for. My words are not working, but the podcast goes live twice a week on YouTube and Spotify, Mondays and Fridays. So go check them out. Reviewing, previewing all the AFL and AFLW action. Let's jump into St Kilda Saints 2024. So they finished with 11 wins, 12 losses, 12 on the ladder. Missed finals. Didn't look like making finals after about round 3 all the way through. So not the best season for them, but we'll have a look at that as we go through. This is all their matches for the season. And to be honest, they finished really well. It was really that period from round 5 through round 11 that really hurt them. Their first week was a pretty solid performance down at the Cattery against Geelong, only just going down. Week 2 was a really good win against Collingwood. That round 3 loss to Essendon, in hindsight, was a really costly one as well. Bombers did not play well, but St Kilda just were worse in the end and lost by 4 points. They then beat Richmond in gather round, and then the bad run of form started. They only won 1 of their next 7 games, and this is where their season got away from them in the end. So after 11 weeks, they're 3-8, and their season is pretty much done at this point. Losses to GWS, Bulldogs, Port Adelaide, Hawthorn, Fremantle, and Melbourne. A couple of them unlucky, like the GWS one. They were 5 goals down at like 3/4 time, but they finished really strong, nearly got over the line. Port Adelaide 10 points at Adelaide Oval's a pretty good result as well, not far off the pace. Hawthorn 5 points at Utah Stadium in Launceston, close again. That Fremantle loss at Marvel is a bit of a costly one as well. Home game against Fremantle when they went down. Obviously, their only win in that period was against North Melbourne, who finished 17th on the ladder. So, not a great run there for the Saints. They then picked it up a little bit heading into the bye. They beat West Coast over in WA, then beat Gold Coast at Marvel, and then got beaten by 20 points against Brisbane at the Gabba, which was actually a really solid performance from them. They actually, up until that point, had been very low scoring, and then that game they really scored quite well. Certainly in comparison to what they had been doing. They still lost, but 20 points to Brisbane at the Gabba isn't the worst result. At this point of the season, their season was done, in all honesty, but they came home really well. Looking at where they played all the rest of their games, they only had 1 game away from Marvel for the rest of the year, and that was 1 trip to Adelaide Oval, which turned out to be a wet weather game. But they flew home. They lost to Port Adelaide in that first week after the bye, but then they really got going, beating Sydney at Marvel. They lost the wet weather game against Adelaide in Adelaide, then smacked West Coast and Essendon. Did get absolutely pumped by Brisbane, which was a really bad performance from them, but then kicked back into gear and beat a couple decent teams coming home. Richmond, not so much a decent team, obviously the Wooden Spooners, but 2 finalists in the last 2 weeks and beat them both in Geelong and Carlton. So that suggests that they certainly have the ability this year to match it with good teams. Up until round 17, they hadn't beaten a team that ended up in the top 8. But they did beat 3 coming home. So Sydney in round 17, Geelong in round 23, and Carlton in round 24. Outside of that, there's not a huge amount of talent on their win list. The win against Collingwood was really good by 15 points in round 2. Essendon were thereabouts, and they smoked them, so that's a really good result. But just a season of what could have been, I guess, for St Kilda. Looking at those results, you flip a couple of them and all of a sudden they're in finals contention, especially early season. You look at that Essendon one, you look at GWS where they could have stolen that one. The Hawthorn one was one that got away from them, and that Fremantle one. There's 3 winnable games in the first half of the year. You chuck in second half of the year, Port Adelaide only losing by 2 points, another one that they could have won. So they certainly had their opportunities. I mean, you can say the same for every team that missed finals. Not every team. The bottom 3 excluded. Every other team had plenty of chances, but in the end just weren't good enough. This is how their last 3 years have gone. 2022, they went 11-11, finished 10th on the ladder. Last year they had a really good season, 13-10, finished 6th on the ladder, and then they've dropped back to similar-ish to 2022, 11-12, and 12th on the ladder. They had to use a few more players this year. Last year, only using 32 was probably a reason why they overperformed a little bit maybe, and perhaps have underperformed this year. They had to use a few more players. AFL average is usually about 39 players a year, so 32 was certainly well under that last year. Their age profile has stayed pretty similar. Their experience has slightly improved, or got more experience, for a better way of wording it, I guess. It's certainly a drop-off on last year, but was last year the blimp in the radar, or was this year? I think the competition's just that close at the moment that everybody on their day can pretty much perform well, and it's just about who performs well on the most days in the end. Look at some of the stats. Obviously, there's a lot on the screen there, so we're not going to look at it all, but I think it's worth noting straight off the bat the points in St Kilda games, both offensively and defensively, are very low. So their defense is good. Their offense doesn't score anywhere near enough. Been pretty consistent though, 77 in 2022, 77 in 2023, and 76 in 2024. So they're pretty consistent in that regard across the board. It's certainly a lot lower than the AFL average, which is up in the 80s, but their defense is pretty good as well. So it comes in both ways. They certainly showed this year, I think, that they can look very good when attacking. In the highest scoring games, they played pretty well. So maybe it's something that Ross, very unlikely, being that Ross has never attacked in his life, but maybe it's a sign that if they do attack, that they could perform well and change that around a bit. Anything else that's noteworthy from last year? Obviously, their metres gained has dropped off a huge amount compared to last year. They get 200 metres less than last year, while also only dropping 30 metres less for their opposition. The turnover game is always, they're never winning that one really, so this year wasn't anything out of the normal there. Contested footy stayed similar. Uncontested footy, not too much of a difference. Outside of that, their forward efficiency slightly improved on last year's performance, and their defensive efficiency dropped as well. So it's net 0 really. Slightly better, but not much. Tackles, they got beaten only just in that, but that's pretty similar. And yeah, the ruck work. So Roll Marshall had a great year. We'll get onto him in a minute. But yeah, his ruck work's probably a little bit below the average in the AFL at the moment. Look at their scoring sources over the last few years. Main thing, they dropped 3.5 points from stoppages offensively, while defensively staying similar. But then they gained basically that back on turnovers offensively, but also conceded an extra couple points from turnovers as well. From areas in the ground, their transition from defence netted them an extra 9 points per game this year, so that side of things was really good offensively for them. however, from the forward half dropped by 7 points. So their ability to create scores from their forward half was certainly not as good this year as it was last year. But likewise, they also restricted their opposition a little bit in that regard as well. So it ended up okay for them, but just a slight drop there offensively for them. We'll jump into the players for this year. Just move that up because apparently the Saints had a lot of players missing this year. Hopefully, there we go, covers the title, but that's okay. So Brad Crouch missed 22, Paddy Dow missed 13, Hunter Clark 12, Max King missed 11, Liam Henry 11, Philippou 10, Seb Ross 10, Zach Jones 10, Dougal Howard 8, Kaminti 8, Jimmy Webster 8, Windhager 8, Ryan Burns 8, Liam Stoker, Dan Butler 7 each, Cooper Sharman and Mason Wood 5 each. So quite a lot of games missed there from, I won't say all of them are the best players in their team, obviously, but certainly all players that play a role and are important in their team, certainly most of them. So they did miss a lot of games this year through injury and suspension and whatnot. This one also doesn't fit on the screen, so let me just fix that up. There we go. So best players, highest rated AFL rating players for the season. By position, key defenders, they were pretty strong to be honest. Callum Wilkie was really good, very similar numbers to last year. Josh Battle improved on his performance from last year, played 23 games, or every game, did really well there. Zane Cordy, slight improvement as well, he only played 8 games though. Key forwards, Tim Membry, slightly improved on last year. Cooper Sharman, I think he showed some really good signs. He had a really good game. I can't remember who was against, but with about 4 or 5 weeks to go, was really good in one of the games. At Marvel, he played 18 games, was slightly down on AFL ratings from last year, but still showed some good development. Max King was below on performance and missed quite a few games. Their medium defenders, this is probably one of their stronger positions. Jack Sinclair, slightly down on last year, but still a very, very good year. Ended up being their highest rated player. Nashaya Wangani-Malira was outstanding this year, showed some very good development, especially early season. He came out of the blocks raring to go and probably one of their better players in that first half of the year when perhaps they weren't playing the best football. He was certainly showing really good signs for them. Riley Bonner, he was good as well. He improved slightly. Liam Stocker was about the same as previous year, and same for Jimmy Webster. Medium forwards, Liam Henry, he showed some good development. He missed a lot of football, only playing the 12 games this year, but did improve on last year's output. Jack Higgins was really solid, did what he needed to, and everyone will remember the goal that nearly eliminated Carlton from finals, but in the end Fremantle let him down. But an outstanding, I won't say outstanding, but a very good year from him. Probably about the mark that you'd kind of want from him, I guess. Mitch Owens was really good last year. This year he had a big drop off. I know he's listed there as a medium forward. He is pretty tall. He plays a bit of a medium forward role, even though he is, I think he's 195 centimetres. I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty confident he's over 190, whether it's 192 or 195. But not the best season from him, so hopefully a bit of development, bit of a good off season. He can really improve that back up to close to last year's rating. Mid forwards, so Bradley Hill played mostly wing this year. He played pretty well on the wing. Played a little bit of back flank, a little bit of forward flank, a bit of everything. He was good. Mason Wood dropped off a little bit on his last year performance. Darcy Wilson obviously did pretty solid, played every game, did what he needed to. And then we jump into the midfielders. Jack Steele had a great year, better than last year, slightly according to AFL ratings. Didn't miss a game as well, so that was crucial for him and his season. Hunter Clark played pretty well. Seb Ross dropped off a little bit, missed quite a bit of footy as well, as did most of these midfielders outside of Jack Steele. Paddy Dow didn't really develop much on last year, but still not the worst season. Zach Jones was solid. Windhager, I think he's got the potential to be really good, but he just hasn't really shown it just yet. Ryan Burns was okay. Rowan Marshall, another really outstanding season from him. Missed out on all Australian honours, but him as a ruckman is really good. He made my second All AFL team, as I guess the third best ruckman in the AFL this year, according to my data. I had Max Gore number 1, Tristan Zeri 2, Rowan Marshall I think came in third from memory. But yeah, a really good year from him. Just probably as a tap ruckman, not quite at the elite standard, but getting around the ground, clearance work, tackling work, possession work, running his opponent off his legs, he does very well. Final thing to look at for St Kilda are the players that were on their list / playing in 2023 that weren't there this year. So Jack Billings is first. He went to Melbourne. Very similar output he had over there this year. Jack Bytel, he went to Collingwood. Once again, not much of an improvement from him once getting to the Pies. And not the biggest loss for St Kilda. Nick Caulfield went to the Bulldogs. Didn't show a heap. Jade Gresham was probably their best player that they lost. He went to Essendon and had very similar output to what he had last year at the Saints, but probably their best player that they lost in AFL ratings and current output. Obviously, Jack Billings is probably the best over his career, maybe, or similar-ish to Jade Gresham, but he's not quite performing at that level at the moment. So that's St Kilda's season. That's a bit of a disappointing season for them, in all honesty. After making finals last year, they sort of lost their way a little bit this year, certainly in the first half of the year. To be 3-8 at one point is not great, but to come home 8-4 from that point on is a really good effort. If they had have done 8-4 in the first 12 weeks, they would have set themselves up for a really good crack at finals, but they just dropped too many games, as it turned out, in that first half of the year, and that really cost them. Where do we see them next year? They're a team that could take that next step. It's a close competition. You have a good off-season. You get a couple good players in. You don't lose anyone too important, and you can slingshot yourself very quickly. You don't need a massive improvement. You just need to keep improving. Will they manage that? I'm not sure. I need to see what they're going to do in the off-season, I think. I'm not 100% around what they're looking at and who they're looking at losing and who they're looking at gaining. It's a very important off-season for them, though, because if they don't improve their team, next year could be a bad year. They could drop back down to 7 or 8 wins and finish 15th. Or if they get a couple good players, don't lose anyone important, they could well have a 14-win season next year, finish top 6 and give finals a real crack. It's going to be interesting off-season. I personally think probably just miss finals next year, maybe 9th or 10th, depending on how things go. But that's my thoughts at the moment. Let me know down in the comments below where you see St Kilda finishing next year. Are they a finals contender? I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But they've certainly finished this season very strong, so that's a positive sign for them. Don't forget to like, as I said, comment down below, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. We're going live with videos pretty much every day through September. There's a couple days off, but not many. So I appreciate you for that. As I mentioned before, podcast goes live twice a week, Mondays, Fridays. Thanks for tuning in. Check out the socials. I'm John. This is All Aussie Rules. Catch you on the next one.